Hello and a warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining this Hardman Co Investor Forum. My name is Keith Hiscock and I'm the Chief Executive of Hardman Co. These forums give investors the chance to hear a company's investment case and then question the management. Now, the final company presenting tonight is Diurnal. This is a European but UK headquartered business that specialises in hormone therapeutics to aid lifelong treatment for rare and chronic endocrine, if I pronounce that correctly, conditions. This is another AIM listed business. It's got a market cap of about £90 million. And the speaker joining us today is the CEO, Martin Whitaker. Martin, over to you.
So, as Keith mentioned, my name's Martin Whitaker. I'm the CEO of Diurnal, and it's really my pleasure to round off the presentations this evening with Diurnal, a revenue-generating European biotech, but with global ambitions. So, just to give you a quick company snapshot, Diurnal was listed on AIM in December 2015. Our current market cap is hovering around £100 million sterling. We have a strong cash position as of the end of June 2021, with £34 million in the bank, and importantly, we have no debt. We are backed by a diverse and wide group of long-term investors, headed up by IP Group, and also healthcare specialists such as Polar Capital. And importantly, we have an experienced board and executive management team that really transcends all the key aspects that we need to make Diurnal a success. Expertise ranging from product development through to commercialization and through to taking companies through to exit. So last week, we announced our full year results to the end of June 2021, and we made significant operational progress during our last 12 months. In terms of what we do, we're addressing two endocrine hormonal diseases with high unmet need, with our three lead products, with a valuable early stage pipeline that we're bringing through into the clinic. Alkindi and Defmody are focused on diseases of cortisol deficiency. This is a market opportunity of greater than $3 billion per annum. And Alkindi primarily focuses on treating children with these diseases of cortisol deficiency. Alkindi is launched in Europe and it's generating revenues from our own commercial infrastructure. And in the last financial year, we generated £2.3 million worth of revenue. Moving across the pond, Alkindi was approved during the period and launched with our partner Eton Pharmaceuticals in the US. So very happy to say that it joins that list that Martin Hall presented earlier on for approvals for 2020. And also during the period, we had several patent grants, particularly in Europe. So we have strong exclusivity around Alkindi all the way out to 2034. But really, over the past 6 months, what has really changed for the company, what will be our driver of growth in the future, is our second product, Defmody, which is primarily targeted at adults and adolescents with these diseases of cortisol deficiency. And Defmody was approved by the European Medicines Agency and also by the MHRA here in the UK, and is launched now and generating revenues in Europe. And that was launched this month. And we have sufficient cash with the fundraisings that we've undertaken over the past 12 months to really drive the Alkindi and Defmody franchise, as we call it, in Europe through to profitability. In the US, we have agreed the route through to registration with the US regulator, the FDA, and also with a Japanese regulator as well. And that trial will start shortly. And again, Defmody is underpinned by strong exclusivity with granted patents, which take the protection out to 2034. In terms of our next product, DiTest, this is an oral native testosterone formulation targeting a huge market of approximately $5 billion of low testosterone or male hypergonadism. And here again, we've made significant progress over the past 12 months with a route all the way through to registration agreed with the FDA. With this product portfolio, we have all the attributes to become a world-leading endocrinology specialty pharma company, establishing commercial traction by our lead products, continuing to develop products through into the clinic and bring them to market, and there's always potential to add other products into our portfolio to accelerate our international profile. So the opportunity that for Diurnal that we see is really addressing significant unmet medical needs in endocrinology. And these needs are often around chronic diseases that require lifelong treatment. So one such group of diseases is where we're targeting are diseases of cortisol deficiency. And cortisol is an essential hormone for life. Without it, you'll die. And for those patients that cannot produce cortisol, they'll need to be replaced by an oral cortisol replacement therapy every day for the rest of their lives. There are two main causes of cortisol deficiency. The first is a group of diseases called adrenal insufficiency, where patients lose the ability to produce cortisol during their lifetime, either caused by an autoimmune disease or sometimes by a benign tumor in your pituitary gland just behind your brain, which switches off cortisol production. The typical symptoms associated with adrenal insufficiency are chronic fatigue. 50% of these patients can't work, and they're always at risk of what's called an adrenal crisis, where they don't have enough cortisol in the body to, for example, fight off an infection. And if they do have an adrenal crisis, then often this leads to the patient going unconscious, perhaps a visit to intensive care. And unfortunately, each year, some of these patients do unfortunately die. The second group of diseases of cortisol deficiency that we're targeting are a group called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH for short. And these are a group of genetic diseases which present from birth. And CAH patients have two issues. Firstly, they cannot produce cortisol, and they have the chronic fatigue that adrenal insufficiency patients have. And secondly, because they have an enzyme block in the body, the building blocks of cortisol cannot be made into the hormone, and they build up in the bloodstream, causing damage. And these are potent sex hormones or androgens that are buzzing around the patient's bloodstream. So, for example, if you're a little girl that's born with CAH, you may be born with ambiguous genitalia. So little girls may look like little boys at birth, and that may require corrective surgery during their lifetime. Both little girls and little boys go through puberty very early on in life, perhaps the ages of 5 or 6. So you grow very quickly as young children. But when it comes to the teenage years where puberty should occur, actually growth is turned off. These patients end up being much shorter than average in adulthood, and complications continue in adulthood in terms of fertility, cardiovascular issues, and ultimately these patients will die some 7 years earlier than the normal population. So both of these diseases are associated with high morbidity and higher mortality. And it's really Diurnal's goal, and a goal that now we can achieve, certainly in Europe, to treat these patients effectively, initiating on Alkindi from birth, transitioning onto F-MODI during adolescence, and then continuing on F-MODI for the rest of the patient's lives. So how are we doing? So firstly, I'll start with Alkindi, which is based on the active ingredient hydrocortisone, which is the synthetic version of cortisol. So chemically the same, so we're replacing like for like in the body. And Alkindi is a first product specifically designed for children suffering from pediatric adrenal insufficiency and congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And in that respect, we have first mover advantage both in Europe and on the other side of the pond as well. So in Europe, Alkindi was approved in 2018 by the European Medicines Agency. It came with 10 years data and market exclusivity under what is called a pediatric use market authorization, or PUMA. and that takes that exclusivity out to 2028, supplemented by our recently granted patents all the way out to 2034. The opportunity that we see for Alkindi, but also for Efmody, is a way that these medicines are prescribed. So if you have a disease of cortisol deficiency, you'll be referred to a specialist treatment centre, so usually a large university-type hospital. And actually, there are relatively few of these centres across Europe. And the opportunity that we have is actually to market the product ourselves in the larger European territories. And that's what we've done with Alkindi, launching using our own commercial infrastructure in the UK, Germany, Austria, and Italy. Where populations are lower, or the geography is more challenging, such as the Nordics, we have distribution agreements in place outside of our core European territories. Pricing and reimbursement discussions are ongoing in other territories in Europe where we don't have reimbursement at the moment. And we've entered into global and licensing and distribution agreements in place for the US and other key territories, which I'll touch upon in a minute. So Efmody is a modified release hydrocortisone. So again, it's based on the synthetic version of the native hormone. And this is approved in Europe and the UK for adolescents and adults with congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And the key thing about Efmody is that it is the first physiological treatment for this patient group with CAH. And Efmody treats this patient group effectively by addressing the two key issues that patients face. Firstly, it's able to replace cortisol in a physiological way to replace the natural rhythm of cortisol that is absent in these patients. And if you look on the graph here, in normal healthy individuals, we have a very striking rhythm of cortisol about the day. It's one of the most striking rhythms, daily rhythms we have in nature, shown in orange here. If you have CAH, you don't have this rhythm, but by taking Efmody twice a day in what we call a toothbrush regimen, lasting at night, first thing in the morning, we're able to approximate this rhythm about the 24-hour period. And importantly, we're able to provide overnight coverage of cortisol, and that's important because this is where the buildup of these harmful androgens occurs in patients, causing damage to the body. So we're able to control androgens as well, effectively with Efmody, and this is data taken from our pivotal phase 3 European trial, the largest ever interventional study carried out in this rare disease. And although the trial did not meet its primary endpoint, we were able to show that Efmody gave better control of androgens over the 24-hour period compared to the standard of care, but particularly gave better control first thing in the mornings when the androgens traditionally are highest. And when patients transitioned onto the long-term extension study, we saw this good androgen control continued for up to 18 months, which is our last data point in the study. And 80% of patients continue to have their androgens controlled into the optimal range. And importantly, they have their androgens controlled on a lower dose of steroid, which is very important for the patient and from a regulatory perspective, because this avoids some of the chronic steroid side effects that occur in this patient group. And we were able to reduce the steroid by a third, from 30 milligrams per day in a pivotal study to 20 milligrams per day at 18 months of a safety extension study. In terms of our commercial progress, as I mentioned, we launched in Germany and Austria earlier on this month. That's following on from a market authorization from the European Commission over the summer. We're using our existing knowledge and expertise gained through Alkindi to progress our marketing, access, and pricing and reimbursement activities. And we believe that we'll realize significant synergies in the utilization of our existing European commercial infrastructure. So our reps now can carry two products as opposed to one, and they're still calling on these same specialist treatment centres. Following the European launch, we launched in the UK at the beginning of last week, and that's following approval from the MHRA again over the summer. And that launch in the UK is nearly 2 quarters ahead of schedule from what we predicted over the summer. And I think that's testament to the really hard effort that the Diurnal team has put in over the past 3 or 4 months since approval. And in terms of the rest of the world, availability will be driven through our existing partners using the European clinical trial data package. And we have global and distribution agreements in place for all key territories, which are shown here. So in terms of business development, it's been extremely busy 12 to 18 months for Diurnal. We've entered into a number of licensing, marketing and distribution agreements across the globe, primarily with Eton Pharmaceuticals, initially in the US, but subsequently extended to Canada for Alkindi Sprinkle, as the Alkindi product is known across the pond. And that deal includes a number of royalties on sales and milestones as well. Some of those we have already received up front and have been announced previously. We've also expanded our global reach to countries such as China, again through a similar licensing agreement to the Eton deal. And thereafter, we have a whole group marketing and distribution agreements ranging from Turkey, across Europe, to Israel, to Switzerland, and also further afield to Australia and New Zealand. And in fact, during a period, we announced that Alkindi is now approved in Australia for all ages, not just pediatrics, and also in Israel as well. And we anticipate launching those territories shortly. One of the major things that the FMODI approval in Europe has enabled us to do is that actually we can use this modified release hydrocortisone, which was development name Chronocort, in other related indications of cortisol deficiency. So at the moment, we have a license in Europe for genetic disease, CAH, but we intend to start a trial shortly in the acquired disease AI. It's still a rare or orphan disease, but there are 5 or 6 times as many patients as there are genetic patients, and we aim to expand to this indication via a line extension study and then apply to the regulators. Across the pond, we've agreed the clinical study design in the US for genetic disease, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and that study design has also been agreed by the Japanese regulator. And if the audience are interested in the study designs, the endpoints, and more details on those studies, then those studies can be found in the appendix to this presentation. And we intend to start both of these studies in the next quarter, and that will open up valuable opportunities for our modified release hydrocortisone product in other indications and territories. Finally, I'll just touch upon DITEST, which is our third product to treat to treat male hypergonadism. It's an oral native testosterone product. The issue in hypergonadism is that most products are either topical or taken by injection, which are painful or inconvenient for the patient, and also have well-documented safety issues. What most patients would like is an oral testosterone therapy, and that is what we've developed. We completed a phase 1 clinical study in the UK a couple of years ago, which showed that we can achieve very good levels of testosterone in the bloodstream to replace the testosterone that is missing. We shared that data with the FDA in a pre-IND meeting, and the FDA have confirmed the route through to registration can progress via a specialized or abbreviated route called the 505(b)(2) route in the US. And what this means is that we can use not only Diurnal generated clinical data to support our registration, but we can also use bibliographical and literature data to support that registration as well. And that significantly de-risks the program, both financially and also clinically, in that we don't need to carry out as many clinical trials. So in terms of what we need to carry out to achieve that registration, the FDA indicated that we need just 2 further clinical studies, a phase 1 multiple ascending dose study, which is funded, and we intend to start early in 2022. We then need to go back and speak to the FDA for an end of phase 2 meeting, and that just leaves us with 1 pivotal phase 3 trial to carry out in the US. The FDA have indicated that trial could be in as few as 150 hypergonadal men. And really, they're looking for pharmacokinetic endpoints, or really levels of testosterone in the bloodstream between 300 and 1,000 nanograms per deciliter as the primary endpoint, an endpoint which we believe is absolutely attainable. So in terms of the outlook coming up, it's been a busy year for us already during 2021 with the approval of FMODI, both in Europe and in the UK. We've concluded our discussions with the US regulator for the Chronocort FMODI study for CAH across the pond. And importantly, we've now commercially launched our second product in Europe and in the UK. So what's coming up? We're starting these additional clinical studies, firstly in the US in Q4 this year for Chronocort in the CAH patient group, and then also in Europe, this line extension to the adrenal insufficiency patient group. And thereafter, we also will start the dye test study shortly after submitting our regulatory documentation to the FDA. So with that, I will just summarize that we're building a global endocrinology specialty pharma company. We've established a strong position in orphan diseases around diseases of cortisol deficiency. We have a credible market access strategy, which has been exemplified by Alkindi in Europe already. We have opportunities to broaden the offering, not only with valuable line extensions, but also our pipeline as well. And we have a strong team with the ability to deliver. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll pass over to Martin for the Q&A.
The share price of Eton suggests that the market is not overly excited by its performance. How do you feel that Eton is doing with Alkindi? Has Eton made repeat orders for supplies?
So to answer that question, Martin, I mean, we're very happy with Eton Pharmaceuticals as a partner. They've invested heavily in the product in the US. And if Alkindi Sprinkle is successful, it will be Eton's biggest selling product. So they're giving it, the utmost attention. In terms of the weakness in the Eton share price over the past few months, Eton has a number of other products going through registration at the moment. And I think the share price is not related directly to Alkindi, but to a number of announcements that Eton put out that some of those products, one product was approved, one was delayed by the FDA, and one product they needed to provide some additional data to the FDA. So I think it's probably best described as a sort of mixed bag of news for Eton, and that's had the effect on their share price.
And has Eton reordered from you?
Yes, so we have. So in terms of the reorders, we have had those from Eton.
Was there very much interest in the commercial rights to Chronocort in the US? How do you think this might change when the drug is de-risked through the clinical trial you're about to embark upon?
So at the time when we were progressing the Alkindi license agreement, we spoke to a number of companies that are also very interested in Chronocort. You've always got the opportunity to perhaps license at an earlier stage, but actually we felt as a company that we had raised sufficient funding. We have raised sufficient funding now to carry out that clinical trial in the US, which will take through to its conclusion. And therefore, we believe that we can de-risk that program significantly. And the chances are that it will be a better deal, all things being equal, if we have positive data in the US from a phase 3 study than before we had a pre-phase 3 study deal in the US.
A quick one. What's the size of your addressable market? You might want to just repeat what you said from the presentation. And he also asked, when do you expect to see a step change in revenues?
So in terms of the addressable market, I'll just talk about our approved products. So Alkindi or Alkindi Sprinkle, the addressable market there is around $200 million per annum. That breaks down to approximately $100 million in the US, around $66 million in Europe, and the rest is made up of the rest of the world. And then for FMODI, for genetic disease, congenital adrenal hyperplasia in Europe, that market is around $250 million per annum, and that increases to almost $2 billion for the acquired disease, adrenal insufficiency. And I can direct Michael to slides in the appendix when the slide deck goes live for some more detailed figures there, broken down by territory and by disease as well. In terms of a step change in sales, I mean, one of the key challenges that we've had over the past 12 to 18 months of a pandemic is of course, COVID. And, if anybody listening has tried to go and see a doctor, a physician of late, it's nigh on impossible, certainly in the UK. And that's really affected us in terms of, yes, our reps can't get into hospitals, but importantly, our patients can't get into hospitals either. Particularly to switch onto Alkindi, which often requires a longer type appointment with a physician and also a specialist nurse to switch over medicine, make sure that the child, the parent, or the caregiver is educated appropriately in the new medicine before they go back and start prescribing. So that's really affected us. We had a launch in Italy, which was affected very similar to I think how Shield was affected. We launched in Italy, and a week later they locked down. What we've seen actually since lockdown measures have abated in several countries is actually face-to-face meetings have returned, and with that there's been an uptick in prescriptions as well as those face-to-face meetings have occurred. So we would anticipate if COVID has abated, but we should return to the trajectory of growth that we had before COVID.
Do you see many opportunities for M&A activity to add to your portfolio and make better use of your infrastructure?
Yes, the endocrinology market beyond diabetes, which was actually huge and dominated by the large players, is actually a relatively small niche area with relatively few players, and we keep in regular contact with all the key companies in the area. We do assess several products each year as to the suitability to perhaps bring on board to Diurnal. I think if I was to sort of classify them, the type of product that we see is typically a US company that's developed a product for the US market at a premium price. They don't really want to get involved in Europe, and they would look to companies such as Diurnal with our European infrastructure to market that product. But often, unfortunately, the price of the US pricing doesn't work in Europe. And although we've seen a number of really good US products, we just know that we won't be able to commercialize them effectively in Europe based on the pricing. That's not to say there aren't any out there, and we continue to actively look in the marketplace to bring products in and hopefully in due course to put them into our reps' bags.
What appears to be the holdup with medicine in Israel?
A lot of these territories, not only medicine in Israel, but also in Europe, once you have the approval, the pricing and reimbursement then goes to a different government agency, and that can take, differing amounts of time to come through. So the good news is we've got the approval in Israel, and that was achieved just over 12 months ago. We've been going through a pricing and reimbursement process, and we hope that will conclude shortly. But dealing with the government agencies, does take a long time in terms of pricing and reimbursement. We just have to be patient, and we hope to launch Alkindi with our partner Medison in Israel shortly.
So it's been a great session. Thank you very much indeed for everybody who's attended, and to the companies.